It's so fun. Okay, so we have been waiting so long to be able to present some of the work that we've done from the Restorative Community Coalition. Welcome to the call. I'd like to welcome all of you to be here. And today we have a series called the Community Regeneration Conversations. We've got multiple presenters during the series of our open house from September 12th to the 16th. And we have a special guest today, specifically Ilona Krohn, who will be speaking in a few minutes. I want to first give a quick update to the agenda for this week. Today we've got the conversation is about humane economics, and there's 3 segments. There's a 10 o'clock, a 1 o'clock, and a 3 o'clock. And the first one is the shifting sands of today, with Ilona in charge of the whole segment. We will close the call. We'll come back on at 1 o'clock with underlying patterns that run our daily lives. I will be presenting a section of that. And then we'll close the call. We'll come back on at 3 o'clock with whiplash factors, the real costs of ignoring human pain. So the plan is to go from a prescribed presentation that lays the groundwork for the day. Then we're going to talk about a bigger picture and a smaller picture, both. It's the inverse outverse. I don't know if that's a word, but whatever. We'll be talking about that, and then we'll have a real conversation just amongst everybody here without any kind of a PowerPoint presentation at 3 o'clock. Tomorrow, the subject's going to be regeneration and de-escalating systems violence, and we'll have some guests on in the morning conversation tomorrow, talking more specifically about the doctrine of discoveries and how that set the whole country up for a certain amount of challenges, and then how are we going to be able to diagnose and hook these binds of our civic systems and our civil systems that have got us all so bound up that it's difficult to stop creating war because we're hooked to the pattern. So we're going to talk about how to unhook the pattern tomorrow on Wednesday. Then we bring our full audience of community. We're bringing as many people as we can from our direct community in Whatcom County onto the calls to talk about what are we going to do over the next 60, 90, 120 days as we go into another winter season with a very large homeless population not being cared for by our civic systems. And what is it that we can do specifically? And as we talk about those things, we're going to have a lot of people bringing ideas. We're going to take those ideas, and over the next few weeks, we're going to turn them into a report that we can then publish online and share globally. So we're going from the top down conversation to the bottom, all the way from the bottom, and then we're going to report it back up. And in the middle of October, we'll do another more formal presentation with different people prepared to be able to present what can we do, because as we build a model out of Bellingham, we can share it with other cities, and it'll become hopefully a national, even an international conversation to bring peace to our planet. And in order to bring peace to our planet and peace to our countries and peace to our economies, we actually must bring peace into our hearts and be able to learn to work as humane people in an economy that works. And with that, I'm going to introduce Ilona Krohn. She is here visiting us in Bellingham from Germany. She is an amazing human being that I have had the great pleasure to meet. And with Ilona, she's going to do a presentation. I'm going to have her introduce herself in the way that she wants to introduce herself. But first, I want to say that it's a real pleasure to talk to somebody who has the big picture look at Homo economicus and how it works in the world. I'd never heard the phrase, cracked me up when I heard it. And she said, I'm serious. And I went, I don't care, I'm laughing anyway. What a funny thing that our entire economy is based on stick figures. I mean, insane. Welcome to the show, Ilona. You have the podium, if you will, the Zoom podium, and you get to share your screen whenever you're ready. Thank you. Let's all clap for a minute. Turn off your mics. Turn on your mics, okay? For a minute, and let's just clap in real time, okay? Welcome, Irene. Welcome, Ilona.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm quite touched. I hope I can still speak now.
I think you can. I totally trust your ability.
Fine, yeah. I'm very excited about this opportunity, and it feels like a huge step for me to actually, for the first time, really share my observations of the last 40 years almost about what's going on in the world and the economy and how it all hangs together. Just to explain a bit what my view is and how I came into it. I was one of these annoying children that would never stop asking questions. So I always wanted to know how and why, and I never stopped. You know, most children stop at some point because they have taken the bait and they basically believe what they've been told. And I never stopped asking the questions. So I was lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to start in the insurance industry in 1986 in Germany as an apprentice, because I just couldn't make sense of what I wanted to do with my life. I mean, the only vision I had was I wanted to travel the world and visit friends. And back in 1986, that was not a career path that made sense to anyone. So, so my parents basically said, okay, you know, you can go to university if you want to, but then you have to have some kind of plan and you have to do something useful. And because I couldn't, I ended up in insurance, as I think lots of people are. So my hearts go out to all the insurance and banking people out there. After 2 weeks, I knew I wouldn't do that for the rest of my life. And lucky enough, I was rescued about halfway through my apprenticeship by reinsurance. Reinsurance is insuring insurance companies on a global basis. The easiest way to describe it is really when you take a big hurricane like Hurricane Katrina, for example, that costs billions and billions of dollars. It would be way too much to be carried by the American insurance industry alone. And so there is a reinsurance market behind that works on a global basis. And the idea is, if there's a hurricane in the US, there won't be an earthquake in Japan, and there won't be floods in Australia. And so it all balances out on a global level. And that actually used to work pretty well for over 100 years. But like all systems, it's not quite the way it used to be anymore. But the big advantage in reinsurance was that I started to look at the economy in a global way, whereas everyone in a corporate or wherever you look at, you tend to look at your industry, your business, your role, and the view becomes more and more narrow. Whereas reinsurance is looking at the entire world, and the reinsurers have talked about climate change, for example, since the early 1980s. They could see the patterns already happening way before politics ever picked it up. And so that allowed me to start looking at global patterns. And then from there, I moved into, I worked for a company based in London who was doing research on insurance markets worldwide. And I did that for 15 years, and I traveled a lot. My special areas ended up to be Africa and German-speaking Europe. Those were the main countries that I was traveling in. So I've seen a whole lot of, I lived in Africa for a while. I lived in the UK for 10 years. I was the economic advisor to the Chamber of Commerce in Manchester, which is the largest chamber of commerce in the UK. Throughout the financial crisis, I had my interview, and a week after my interview, Northern Rock collapsed, which was the first bank in the UK to go down. And so I basically was in that role all the way through the financial crisis until April 2009, when everyone thought we're going back to business as usual. And I didn't believe it then. I still don't believe it. And so, yeah, so I would like to share some of my observations over the last 30 years. I've always struggled to actually to write about it and put it into a cohesive one thing, because it's all interlinked. Everything is interlinked within this. And if you go down one rabbit hole, you find yourself way down somewhere. And I didn't know how to pull back and come back up. So I'm very, very happy that that with this focus on the incarceration industry in the US, it's now like a thread that's going through the presentation. So yeah, so I think without much further ado, let's see what's there. Wait a second.
As you're sharing your screen, I just want to be so grateful that you have traveled in so many places and listened so broadly to so many people, and that you've had the fortitude to sit down and read statistics. I'll tell you what, that is a skill set that most people don't have. And the other big thing, Ilona, before you start, is to just acknowledge that many of us who read statistics doesn't mean that we understand what they mean. And it really doesn't mean that we understand what they mean relative to the rest of the moving world around us, because our universe is spinning so fast. And that spinning universe that's out there in the cosmos is now connecting us even inside, because our inner bodies are spinning faster because of technology. And so all of our neural pathways, and I want to inject that into your conversation. I know that it's very serious what you're talking about, but for anybody who's on the call who doesn't understand quite what she's saying, be patient. You'll figure it out by the time she's done. Even if the statistics and the charts sort of start wigging your eyes out, just breathe, relax, and pay attention. So with that, come back on, Ilona, do your PowerPoint. I'm so excited to see it.
So yeah, so this another thing I would like to say is that I have a deep, deep love and compassion for human beings. And I think that's what really makes me unique as an economist, because that's not usually a combination that you get. And I have so much appreciation for all our differences, for all the different cultures, for all the different ideas and thoughts and potential out there. And my goal really is with this presentation to allow people to see through the veil and just realize that this can't work. It's not going to work, and we need to start doing something different. And we're going to talk about more of what that is later in the week. There are some huge numbers in there. There's some graphs in there. Don't be scared. Just take it in. We can talk about anything that you like afterwards. If there's a really pressing question, you can interrupt me too, but I think it's a good idea to follow Joy's hint and just listen to the whole thing, and then we can go back and talk about specifics. So yeah, for me, the intention is to really talk about a few of the myths, because the economy is, and I think it's part of the way economists have very cleverly developed their own, or tooted their own horn over the last 50 years, that they always seem to know everything, they know how everything works, and that is not really the case. And so I would like to go a bit into so this is the overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the underlying assumptions behind economic theory, and also how we will see that within the presentation, how this is actually how the theory becomes fact and how the theory becomes reality, and we actually start acting the way economics always thought we act. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then we're going to have a bit of a look at the global financial system, and then oh, this is actually, sorry, this is mixed around. So it's actually first corporate behavior patterns and public sector behavior patterns. So we're looking at different aspects of the economy and how they work within themselves. Then we are looking at the US economy. That's just one slide. And then there's a look at the rising inequality. Then we're looking at the system's effect on humans. And then we're looking at the business model of incarceration. And I've also got one case study about Florida, which is looking to do things differently. So let's start with the economy. The economy is always seen by people. They feel so overwhelmed by it that people kind of submit to it like a natural catastrophe or whatever. It's completely out of human. Humans are powerless to deal with it, but it's actually a man-made system that is built on certain ideas of what humans are like and how they interact with each other. And so I don't want to go into too much detail with this, but I'd like to just highlight where this comes from. So the father of economics is generally seen as Adam Smith, and he wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, which I think is a really interesting coincidence when we're looking at American history. But that's just by the by. I believe that the way the economic system developed based on Adam Smith is actually a misunderstanding of what he meant. But again, that is just my theory. So everything that you know about the economy, this idea of there's private property, there's self-interest, people are self-interested and they interact with each other, and that creates competition, which will give us fair prices in markets. And the government should really not interfere that much with it because that's just the way it works best. He said that basically that kind of system works best for all because self-interest, individual self-interest adds up to a growing economy for all. That is the key idea that economists have taken out of it. He actually wrote a second book on the theory of moral sentiment, where he's talking about that every human being has an inner connection to what's right and wrong to do, which isn't connected to morals necessarily, but it is like an inner knowing of how to act in the right way. And that is actually what he meant when he's talking about that invisible force that is correcting the markets. So even Smith already understood that just self-interest in itself is not going to bring a balanced economy. And that actually became more and more clear over the next 150 years or so. And so in the beginning, or yeah, around the First World War, John Maynard Keynes, he's the big other thought thinker in economics. And his idea is that basically you can't leave the market to itself because it leads to inequality. Businesses undermine the competition. There's not free-flowing prices. There's a tendency to monopolies. And so he said the governments need to rein in and control to make sure that the markets don't run out of control and destroy themselves. So that was really behind around the context of the Big Depression in the 1920s. That's really where his thoughts are coming from, because that had such a devastating effect on everyone. And since then, basically all economic discussions are around more or less government. So you've got the classic economics who say, well, it should be no government or little government, and the others who are saying, well, there should be as much government as possible because human self-interest just doesn't cut it. Another theorist who's always, actually, he's not very well known, but I think he's important, is Thomas Malthus. He wrote in the early 1900s, and he was looking at the the farming sector, basically the food supply of people. And what he realized back then is that the populations were growing exponentially, but that the food production didn't actually keep up with human population development. And his theory was that eventually humanity would starve itself because there were more people than the food supply could actually nourish and feed. And obviously we're still here, 100 and almost 200 years later. Malthus has been disproved again and again and again, because what he didn't realize was that there would be all kinds of inventions around agriculture. There would be, there would be technological advances. There would be advances in how you would, basically how to treat the soil and all that kind of stuff. So, but the thing is, whenever there's a case where it looks like there's a limited supply, people pull out Malthus as the example. So the economists always go back to this idea that there's not enough for all. So I come back to that in a minute. The Homo economicus that Joy mentioned earlier, that is basically, that's a modern invention, but it's built on the basis of Adam Smith. But as economics became more and more sophisticated, and there would be more and more actuarial and statistical analysis, basically the economists had to come up with a simplified version of a human being that would actually fit into the system. And they called that the Homo economicus. So the Homo economicus is a bit of a monster, actually, because the assumption is that they're selfish and motivated by self-interest, and that they are always making rational decisions, which is obviously, kind of not what we are like. We're not making rational decisions, and we have lots of other motives behind and beyond self-interest.
I have to put a comedy in there. I don't know that I have seen a stick figure yet that looks like a monster. We got stick figures and we got monsters, and they're sort of different. So if anybody has one, you can send it to me. I'd love to see it, but it's definitely a problem that we're dealing with. So thank you, Ilona, for making this whole conversation fun to talk about, even though you're dead serious. I get it, but thank you so much. It's worth having the conversation.
Well, the Homo economicus, and that is the really funny bit, and that is actually where and again, we're going to talk about it later in the presentation, but the Homo economicus is kind of, again, a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when you are looking at how we are forced to operate within the systems, not just the economic systems, all our systems, it is actually the Homo economicus that is the one that will succeed, because that's the way that the system is set up.
It's programmed that way.
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of, if everyone just follows the rules as they're set up, that's basically what we're creating. So next one. Yeah, so this is, for me, I just wanted this out there in one big slide, because everything, and this is based on human experience. I mean, all through human history, we have again and again and again experienced what it's like if there's not enough for all. And that has brought deep trauma and wars and all kinds of things. And that is underlying, it's the key assumptions that is underlying all economics.
And to be clear, you're saying this is a myth. This is not a thing. It's just made up.
Well, as I said, it comes out of past experience. It was taken because all theory is always coming out of the past. So you basically look at how have things developed over the past, and then you extrapolate it and you make some assumptions of how that will continue in the future. And when you're looking at any old lexicon or any old encyclopedia, and you actually look at predictions for the future, it's hilarious, because it's never been right, ever, ever, ever. But we have entire industries now who basically just make their money by making predictions about the future. And so the underlying assumption behind the entire economy is that there's not enough for all. That brings us to limited supply. And then we have a demand for something. And the idea is, okay, where supply and demand meet, that's where the price is. And that's the fair price for the market. Now, I actually did a bit of an, yeah, it was a bit of a joke, actually. I was in a conference with my team, and I just said, so what would happen if there was endless supply, if it was unlimited supply? What would the price for anything be? And the thing is, there's no answer in the system, because unlimited supply doesn't generate a price. You know, if I could do it with, you know, with lines and so on, but I mean, everyone can see this. And so, so the thing is that when you're looking at technology over the last 30 years, the enormous advances that human creativity have made, we're literally living. I mean, if you've followed Star Trek over the years, you know, kind of, we are living in a Star Trek universe almost. You know, we have our little translators, and we've got our, like, it's really amazing.
It is.
And so creativity can find solutions. If we focus our creativity on finding solutions rather than functioning within the system, we could have solutions within days, and we would be in a completely different situation. And the limited supply is just no longer relevant. It's outdated.
So our goal in this series of conversations and over the next few months, our goal is, in fact, to create solutions fast, because we can do it. Thank you, Ilona, for pointing that out. We can do it when we focus on solutions rather than focus on the problems. Understanding the problem is important. Understanding the myths that are underlying the problem that come from past flawed thinking, but working into the future is why you're here, Ilona. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you for having me. So this is another kind of brain buster. I don't want to go too deeply into it. I think the visuals speak for themselves. So this is the money in circulation. So that is the actual money that runs through people's bank accounts over the years. And what the main thing I want to point out, because obviously it's going up over time because we've got inflation and all kinds of things, but something funny happened here around 2008, because money was going up, and so we had in actually, I think in 2008, I don't actually have the number. I think it was 4 trillion or something like that. Oh yeah, that looks about right. So we had 1 trillion US dollar going, and that is 12 zeros, by the way, just to keep that in mind, 12 zeros. That is the money in circulation worldwide. And it was 1 trillion in 1990. It was 4 trillion in 2010. So that is 20 years. It kind of quadrupled. And then it moved from 4 trillion to 40 trillion not even, what is it, 12 years. So this is basically money that is floating around the system. Now that in itself, I wonder where that is, because it's definitely not in my bank account. So that's one thing. And the other is, what does that actually do? Because if there's 40 trillion US or so much more money flowing through the system, people have 401ks, people have investments, people have savings accounts. That money is looking for return on investment, because that's how our system is set up. And actually, if you include all the investments on top of that, which is what I call like funny money or kind of virtual money, we are actually coming up to 1.3 quadrillion. And actually the number is down here. So that is 15 zeros. So 32.5 times the money in circulation is actually moving around through computer screens in worldwide, and that is never touching the ground. It's never touching a human being. That is money chasing money. And that is what is creating all these bubbles that we've had over the past. And so, as I said, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritties, but this is just to highlight that something can't quite add up here. So the next one is corporations, and I've picked corporations because they really determine so much of our economy nowadays. It's not that the small and medium enterprise that used to be the backbone of an economy, that's really gone. In Germany, it's under enormous pressure, even though it used to be really the majority of German businesses. And they're being replaced by corporations. And I'm now talking about the top corporations, really the big ones. But just to go into what a corporation actually is. So a corporation is a legal person. So it is defined as a person like you and I are, and it has similar duties and similar rules. But it only, other than a normal person, it only has limited liability. The liability of a corporation is limited by its capital. So the reason it was set up was that shareholders who wanted to come together to generate profits could basically privatize all the profits and limit the liabilities. So when things go really wrong, and again, the most dramatic example is the global financial crisis of 2008, the banking profits were all paid out to banking employees and shareholders, and the liability was paid by the taxpayer. And I mean, a market economist will tell you, yes, but they paid it all back and all that stuff, but that's not the point, because they paid it back with funny money that is, you know, kind of flowing through the system. So that's one thing. So there's limited liability and privatized profits. What is worse in a way is that all people within the corporation are by contract obligated to act in the interest of the shareholders. So even a CEO with very high ideals, if he acts within the role of CEO, can't really do the right thing because they need to focus on profits, because that's what the shareholders are focused on. And that is unchanged no matter how corporates are claiming or trying to become more environmentally friendly, or, you know, a lot of corporates are getting involved in charity stuff, and so they're trying to rewrite their image, but the underlying identity hasn't changed. And the problem is that, so when you're acting, let's say you are a claims person in an insurance company who's dealing with somebody who's been hurt, or with a policyholder who is, I don't know, who's become sick or whatever it is, you can't act as a human being towards that policyholder. You have to act as a claims manager or a claims person, and you have to, by contract, you have to represent the interest of the insurer and not the interest of the policyholder. And you can't really act from human being to human being. You have an unequal power structure there, because the corporate is so much more powerful than the individual who's looking for something. And that's just not just in insurance, that's everywhere. You've got the same when you're dealing with credit card companies, when you're dealing with anyone. You know, it's always the same pattern. Another issue is the issue of liability. I said it's limited liability, but obviously the limitation is the capital. So if a company has lost all its capital to liabilities, it's done something really wrong. You know, that's not where you want to be. Generally, liability always, oh, sorry. Now I need to move back up just a second. Generally, every corporate will try and limit its liability. And there's, again, entire industries who are teaching corporates and businesses how to manage their various risks. But the issue is, if I want to limit my liability, and that is not just the corporate as a whole, it's also the people within the corporate. So again, if I'm obligated to act on behalf of the corporation, and I'm making a mistake, I might be liable as an employee to the corporation. And so people are just uncomfortable to make individual decisions because it can come back to bite them. And that has led over the last 40 years or so, and I'm talking about insurance because I said that's the industry I know, but I know it's the same thing in everywhere else. I still was taught how insurance works, where it comes from, the big picture stuff, kind of how does insurance work and why does it work? Nowadays, you have very clearly defined roles, and you just get a manual and you're being trained for that job, for that role, and you just have to follow the manual step by step. And there's really no individual decision anymore. But that also means that every person within that corporate, can hide behind the role. That's the one side. So they can always say, well, I don't know anything more. And I don't really want to, and I don't want to know anything more. I'm not going to ask any questions because that's just way beyond my job description. But on the other hand, and that is where it gets truly tragic, the human being behind that role is really losing their soul. You know, and I've seen so many people in the insurance industry who are born to be, I don't know, actors and artists and musicians and all kinds of things. And they're sitting in insurance because they believe that they will never make enough money from their true potential or their true talent to actually make a living. And so for me, this is the most, or one of the big tragedies is the lost potential that is lost in corporations. Yeah, so then another issue around the corporates is the sheer size of them. So when you're looking at the top 500 corporations worldwide, their turnover, so their sales essentially, amounted to 31.7 trillion. Again, that's 12 zeros. I didn't want to constantly, put in the full number. In 2021, and that is more than 1/3 of global GDP. So GDP is the gross domestic product. So that is, in theory at least, the added value of all economies together worldwide. And 1/3 of that is just done by the top 500 corporates. And again, when you want to put it into the context of the US, the largest economy worldwide is the US with about 25 trillion. No, sorry, that can't be right. 2.5 trillion. That can't, I forget it. Forget about the number. I don't know it now, but the largest economy generates roughly 25% of global GDP. So the top 500 corporates, again, generate more turnover than the entire US in a year. Yeah, then we have an issue around increasing short-term thinking, and that is true for everyone, but it's particularly pronounced in the corporate world, because when I started in business, we had annual accounts. There was no quarterly account. There was an annual report, and that would be published once a year. And then you knew, okay, this is where we were, this is where we are. And so you had at least a year that was relatively stable. So you made a plan over the next 12 months, and that was it. Then at some point, quarterly accounts got introduced. And so every quarter, you've got 90 days to plan and to have results. And that just means that there's no long-term thinking. It's just about, well, let's get, especially for the corporate, because the corporate has shareholders who are looking for matched profit predictions. So a corporate is always in trouble if they're not meeting their predicted numbers. And so that is done on a quarterly basis. And that means no one within the corporate has time to really think about anything long-term. Then we've got the fast-moving technology on top, and we have this instant information that literally as soon as something happens, within seconds, the world knows about it. And then with the size of corporates, we have the issue of political power, lobbyism, and regulation. And I've picked actually 2 European examples here. One is Amazon Europe. They, of course, Amazon is always looking to base their operations in the best tax environment possible. So they are actually located in Luxembourg in Europe, which is a European tax haven. But they thought they could do better than that. And they were actually, I think last year, planning to move their European headquarters to Cyprus. I don't know whether anyone or all of you know where Cyprus is, but Cyprus is an island that is half Greek, half Turkish. And Amazon's turnover is something like 25 times or more the GDP of Cyprus. So basically they were looking to move in there, and they were actually already helping the Cyprus government to write their tax regulations. And when the European Union got wind of it, they basically went in and they stopped it. But that is the kind of thing that corporates do. And then you have the other one, which is a German example. The German car industry is massive. It's got thousands and thousands of jobs. It's the backbone of the German economy. And there is nothing that can be done and is done in German government that is against the interest of the German car industry. And there's loads of examples for that. I mean, we still have unlimited, we have no speed limit on German roads. I mean, there's a lot of Germans who are very happy about that too, but the German car industry, they're building powerful cars with lots of bells and jingles on it, and they're more fun to drive if you can drive really fast. So, you know, that's just a way of doing it. And there's so many reasons why a speed limit is a good idea. In Germany, I don't think it will happen for another 20 years or so. And the other example was electric cars. The German car industry really resisted the idea of getting away from the normal car engine. And they only started moving into the electric cars when the Americans basically started doing it first. So they reacted, but they tried to stop any inventions and any creativity around the exhaust, you know, the normal exhaust system as long as they possibly could. So that's corporations in general. Now I would like to have a quick look at financial services corporations. Yeah, so this is a specific, and there's actually a myth here that sorry about that, that we're going to bust. And that is, I mean, that is true for corporates in general, but there is this idea that the government is in control of what's going on, and they're not. I mean, that is true for corporates in general, but it's specific. It's very clear when you look at the financial services sector. And I actually wonder whether we should have a quick break just for everyone to take a breath, or should I keep going? If you could just.
I could make a comment that might allow people to, because I think what you're doing is absolutely stunning. And just think about if anybody do you need to take a break and leave the screen, Ilona, or do
No,
you
I'm fine. I just wanted to give
Okay.
people time to digest this a bit, because I know this is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I would open the conversation just for a couple of comments if Mark, maybe you have something to say, or Mel, or somebody, but I want to notice that when you started talking about the fact that the speed of change with technology, we haven't talked about the fact that in, just in the last decade or two, when we went up to the internet, we also moved the trading floor and the speed of ability to transact into the stock options, and it went online. And that means that all of your short-term profits that are up there, people are trading and betting and trading and betting, and the speed and the ballooning of technology and in the real world with people went off the charts. I mean, I was stunned to find out that large institutions and large groups can trade 24/7. Private people who are working through their mutual funds at their local office, you put in a trade to buy or sell options or stock or whatever, it might take 24 to 48 hours for your stuff to go through, but the institutions are trading that fast. So the speed of the churn of the money is also like off the charts. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, reiterate your point. I think, Joy, to begin with, the markets and what is going on with technology and trading is absolutely phenomenal, especially the manipulation, again, of the front loading. Just to reiterate your point about the corporation, Ilona, they're seeking every particular advantage in the marketplace, and every little loophole, which sort of does lend to the regulatory argument somewhat. But whatever side of you fall on, I just want to thank you, first of all, for doing this work and to really document it and to explain it so clearly to everybody, because this is exactly what I've observed over the last 40 years, as I'm sure clearly you have. And to actually go through the process of documenting it all, to go through the process of being an expert in your field and know it as well as you do. I know for a lot of people, this might be really dry, but I see nothing but juicy details throughout. And I just want to thank you so much for doing this work, because we need people with your expertise, background, and credibility to communicate it so that the rest of us who are seeing what's going on have an opportunity to agree with you, because this is what I've observed plainly. And I also think it's a complete injustice to the employees that are working within these corporations, because they are hamstrung to the benefit of the shareholders, and they do have to sacrifice what Adam Smith discussed as far as the moral integrity that you brought up as well. And I think that's where if we can get more in alignment with the moral integrity that Adam Smith talked about, then the rest of his economic theory would have a lot more credibility and it would be less destructive. And I just want to, again, thank you.
Irene, you wanted to say something?
I do, but something happened.
You went on mute somehow.
That's okay.
Yep.
I probably am a small percentage of all of the, well, maybe not. I'm just going to state what I have experienced with technology. I'm 82. I'm not equipped. My brain works differently. Joy says her brain works different. Mine works just in the 16 years difference in our ages.
Yeah.
And I know there's people my age and older who do this very, very well. However, I did not have a job within the system where I learned all the intricacies of the technology. And then I work with a population, the homeless, the incarcerated, who are just as badly equipped as I am or worse.
Mhm.
And so it really debilitates folks trying to make their way in society. And I know this is not going to go on forever, but it's with us now. And I'm really looking forward to the time when these things are obsolete. And I know that's a big question, or big, big statement. But in the meantime, it's a huge detriment to those people who do not have the expertise that most of you on this call to date already have. And God bless you. Thank you for.
Thank you, Irene. Go ahead, Carol Sue.
Well, I agree. Thank you, Ilona. I'm loving this. It's not too much at all. It's hardly enough. And I wanted to take it back to where you were talking about the Depression, and that the Depression was actually choreographed so that the Congress would then finally allow the Federal Reserve to come in and create central banking. And that was the whole purpose of that. So we have to look at how everything is being orchestrated, not by government, but this, you know, the 13 families that are really own the world. And that this is all, that's what it's really all about. So I just wanted to put that, my 2 cents in.
So
Thank you,
Ilona,
Carol.
yeah, Ilona, if you want to go back into it now that we've had a chance to have a
Actually,
feedback.
can I just respond to Carol
course.
quickly?
That's the point.
Yeah, because I don't like to bring conspiracies into this because it actually clouds the picture. You know, you don't need a manufactured big depression in order to see all the patterns. You know, whenever we talk about conspiracies, then there's a bad guy and there's victims, and we are not victims. We are all powerful individuals who can start making other decisions. And so so I just don't like to, you know, there's all kinds of things that all kinds of people are trying to do. But we are just looking at the patterns that are inherent of the system. And the system was set up from past experience and past and certain assumptions about human beings. Thank you, Carol.
All I can say about that is it does come from the book. None dare call it conspiracy.
Okay, yep, noted. Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, and I want to back up what Ilona's talking about, because the fact of the matter is what we've learned in trying to talk about incarceration and trying to talk about any of these issues, the instant we go into, if we can stay in the patterns, that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to talk about patterns that replicate over and over and over and over and over a time, because it's the patterns. Human beings come and go. Families, yes, they have institutional patterns, but it's the patterns of our emotional behavior that we can change. And that's why it's so important that we look at patterns over and over and over. I don't care who's controlling the patterns. If the pattern is off, we need to correct the patterns. That's what we have to learn how to do. James, go ahead.
Like I understand the conspiracy theory stuff, but the way I look at it is this is sort of moving forward to create some kind of a support for everyone, because we need to take the power back in the aspect of all of us have the ability to do something to make it better for our lives and other people's lives. That's what I've done most of my life, working with people. And I've always figured I have power and I've worked on it. I don't know how much I've done in it, but it's helped people get better lives. And so we need to just continue to do stuff Ilona's doing, everyone in this group's doing different things to give us that power. We have it. We can't be victims. We have to be the people who take power back.
Yeah. I think Frank had his hand up.
If he doesn't come off mute, take it.
Okay.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
All right, I'm here. I'm listening, and ignorance and awareness are like two sides of the same coin. The possibility that's being created here is that we see we're no longer ignorant, and we see, and therefore we have the power. We
Yeah, and we have choices. Yep.
we're full of potential. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. And go ahead, Ilona. We can pay attention again. We're
Okay.
present.
So this is a massive slide, and we could talk about this for a week, you know, once we go into the patterns of the financial services sector. I don't want to do this. I just want to highlight a few bits which kind of reiterate the points I've already made. I said in the beginning that there is this discussion between economists who say the market will solve it all and government should stay out of it, and the people who say, well, the market can't be trusted and government needs to control it. We're looking at the public sector in a minute, which kind of is another puzzle to the piece, or piece to the puzzle. But just in terms of regulation, so there are some highly regulated sectors. And ironically, the financial services sector that keeps really busting itself again and again is one of the most highly regulated ones. And one of the, I don't actually quite know when it started in Germany in the early 2000s. There was this idea that the capital base for financial services industry might be too low if it's calculated on the same way in the same way as other industries are. And so there was this idea that every company should be examined and analyzed in terms of its own risk and its own business, basically the actual business that it was doing. So, you know, in banking, that is the investment risk, it's the currency risk. There are certain risks within the banking industry that some are more extreme, some are less. And basically the idea was to create an actuarial model that would allow banks to calculate their individual capital. And that is called risk-based solvency. And that model was already in place when 2007 happened. So this is kind of, that was the most advanced regulation available at that point, and it couldn't prevent the financial crisis of 2007. Kind of the losses were so much higher than any model could ever have predicted. Now, the interesting bit is there was a movement at that time to move that risk-based solvency into the insurance industry. And in spite of it already having shown that risk-based solvency didn't prevent banking from going under, that solvency model was still implemented for the insurance industry. And in Europe, that cost, the total cost of that implementation of that regulation is estimated at 4 billion euros. Now, not just that, since then, that solvency model is being advertised, let's put it like that, on a global basis by the IMF and the, what are they called? By the big global institutions, by the World Bank, as best practice worldwide. And I was as I said before, I was in Africa and spent a lot of time there. And there were so many countries in Africa where basically the IMF said, if you want any support, any credit or anything like that from the IMF, you need to implement all the best practice that comes out of Europe and out of the United States. And so many, again, when you're looking at the costs of implementing regulation like that, let alone that the people in the countries often didn't have the expertise to do that. You would really think in Africa, you have other things that are more important. So there's there is a regulation doesn't work because it's not really doing what it's supposed to do. B, you have a lot of cost that is connected to regulation. And then C, there are entire industries whose business model is just to help businesses through the regulation. And when we look at the US economy, you're going to see what I mean by saying that. So that's the issue of regulation. I'm going to skip the business loans because I think we're getting too deep into stuff. The long-term effects of the banking bailout I find it kind of ironic that just after the global crisis, as all kinds of things went really, really wrong, Wall Street just kept going from height to height to height. I mean, it was a bull market that just never stopped. And so all the way, that's the longest bull market in history from 2009 to 2020. And there were gains of more than 400% made in that time. And I mean, I showed you the money graph before, that is the money that is looking for some return. And with low interest rates, what do? You start gambling in stuff. So yeah, so that is that one. And then again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but this is something that has also happened since the financial crisis. And because it's an American company, I feel it's important to talk about it. So one of the biggest winners from the global financial crisis are the asset management companies. And there's just 3 or 4 worldwide who basically rule the entire market. The biggest one of them is BlackRock. And they're basically a services company. They're an asset management company. They're working with banks, they're working with pension funds and all kinds of other institutions in order to sell packaged investment products to individuals. And because they're not a bank, they're not subject to banking regulations. So everything I said before about banking doesn't apply to an asset management company. They're effectively not regulated at all. Ironically, and that is another thing that I don't want to get too far into, is regulators, where do they learn what to regulate? They need to talk to the industry they're supposed to be regulating, because somebody has to explain to them how this works. These are all government people. They don't have a clue about business. And so the EU regulators brought in BlackRock in 2008 as a consultant to help them with banking regulation and how to deal with the fallout of the financial crisis. So really, that is kind of, bringing in the wolf to look after the sheep. And of course, there's all kinds of rules around, the part of the business that's doing the consulting cannot talk to the part of the business that's doing the investing. But I mean, please, that's just a bit naive. So then, again, it would be nice to have a graph, but it's not that, as I said, within the bigger picture, it's not that big a topic. But BlackRock managed managed 1 trillion in assets in 2008 when they were basically getting started in a big way. And in 2022, they reported 10 trillion US dollars under assets, or of assets under management. So they have increased tenfold between 2008 and 2022. And that is just one of them. The other asset management companies have very similar developments. So that is not a normal growth rate for any kind of business. Then just to make it more interesting, BlackRock also, and that goes back to the technology, BlackRock also developed analytical software called Aladdin, which is analyzing over 1 million data points daily from all over the planet in order to predict developments that might have an impact on the development of the financial markets. And that is the most popular and the most used software that is used not just by BlackRock, but by regulators, by banks worldwide, by pension funds, and so on and so on. So there's an additional 18 trillion US dollars, and that's almost the equivalent of the American GDP in 2018, is managed indirectly through the analytical software of BlackRock. And what is really, I wonder that nobody even really mentions this, but if everyone is using the same software in order to make investment decisions, I mean, then obviously it works as long as it works, and then it explodes big time. You know, it's not really rocket science, but it's not talked about in a big way. There are a number of university studies that have been done on the effects of BlackRock, but they are all being debunked, or not debunked, but contradicted by basically BlackRock's own studies. And especially from the US, there's always this thing, you know, we are market economy, we are capitalism, this is what we live for, kind of thing. And so it's not, nobody really questions this, at least not loud. And then another aspect, because BlackRock is actually holding so many shares in so many companies, they are the largest individual shareholder in many of the world's biggest corporates. And it's in 50% of the US top firms are actually, BlackRock has not a majority shareholding, but a shareholding that's big enough to really impact company policy and company decisions. And I've seen some analysis of the German market, and that is not, I mean, they are not actually keeping a free market going. It's like their interest is to kind of make deals in between the corporates so that prices are kept high. And, you know, that is really, yeah, a controlling share in the economy. And again, there's no rules, there's no regulation, there's nothing about it. And the thing is, if there were, that's my point from earlier, regulators would always be doing a catch-up game. You know, they never, because this moves so fast and they are so creative. I said the creativity is not put into finding solutions. The creativity is put into how can we outsmart the system. And so this is an example of how creative humans get, but in a really destructive way, because nobody's looking at the big picture.
If I could bring that down home locally for anybody who has been attending any of our local political conversations around predictive policing and law enforcement and racial profiling and all these computer systems, when technology came in and they started using technology to predict movements in the marketplace and crime in the marketplace, this is a very down home and real way of controlling people. And when you listen to what Facebook does with being able to respond. So I just want to wrap that around in a circle, and we'll talk about it in another conversation. I don't want to take it off course, Ilona, but this is a very real way that Facebook and Amazon and all these people who are doing SEOs and all this stuff, they're watching your eyes move on the page. They're watching your emotional triggers. They're watching predictivity. Predictions is exactly what you're talking about, Ilona. And this just makes it down home and personal for me to understand how this market is shifting and how it controls people here. And it makes it that much more important to understand your emotional resilience and how humane economics is what is necessary for us to actually bring humanity back into the picture. Because right now, the systems are truly created, advertised, manipulated, all this stuff. It's very interesting that you brought that all together for us, Ilona. At least brought it together for me in a whole new way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's move into the public sector. Yay! Next slide. So patterns in the public sector. So the public sector always tells us they are looking after us and they are fulfilling society's needs and so on and so on. That's the story that is told. But again, when you're looking at how the bureaucracy works and how individuals within that work, that just can't be true, and it's not true. So bureaucracies where corporates are basically chasing profits, bureaucracies traditionally work with plans and budgets. So you have a problem or an issue within society or within your community, and you say, well, okay, I need so and so many people in order to tackle this, and it's going to cost that much, and so that's the money I need. But actually, that is one of the economic theories that really clicked for me when I was in university, because the theory of bureaucracy is that a bureaucracy is working when it's constantly growing. So the rational thing for a bureaucrat to do, if your career is being a bureaucrat within the public sector, then you basically need to say, okay, I've got a budget of, let's say, $100,000. You need to make sure that you're spending all that budget by the end of the budget season, because otherwise it's going to be cut down next year. And that means your influence is going down. So as a rational and good bureaucrat, you're going to spend your entire budget, the 100,000, and then you say, well, if I had 10% more, I actually could have done that and that and that in addition to that. And so a bureaucracy will, in its nature, always expanding. You know, the public sector, just by its nature, will always expand because that's the way it works. So you have to make sure that you spend your budget. The deadline leads to bloated budgets, and you create ways to create false costs. I mean, the public sector bureaucracy is incredibly inefficient. Another part of this, and this is kind of, a lot of the public sector in the US is working as a corporation, not as a private corporation, but as a public corporation. And that means that it's kind of doing business in its own right. They are working slightly differently from a private corporation, but a lot of the patterns are the same. So a public corporation will also be risk averse, and they will be slow to change. There's a tendency to administer the system rather than deal with the issues. I mean, I was absolutely blown away in the UK when I realized that the NHS, that the National Health Service, that's a tax-financed health system for all in the UK. And that kept exploding in its costs, and they have been trying to rein it in for decades. And when I was there in the early 2000s, I had friends who were working in that sector. And unfortunately, I don't have the numbers, but something like out of the NHS is the biggest employer in the UK. So that's one thing. It's just massive people who are working in there. But only about 30% or something of people were actually seeing sick people. The rest were just administering the system. And that is, again, something that you can see in all public sector setups. Then you have the problem that the funds and the services are distributed by people who don't understand the issues because they're public servants. They're living in a bubble where reality is very different from, somebody who's homeless or somebody who's running a small business and so on. And so the solutions, or the people who are actually supposed to bring the solutions, don't really have any experience in what it's like and what is really needed. So then you're getting into somebody needs to explain it to you, and who will explain it to you? The people who can make money out of the system. So we're back to this thing that basically government always needs to rely on other experts whose interest is to get money out of government. And again, that is not, that's not conspirational, that is just the way it works. And if you are working within the system and you want to be successful, that's how you act. Then we have the issue that the public sector often holds monopolies for the services they provide. So if you're looking at policing and things like that, that only the public sector is doing that. If the public sector is inefficient, a lot of countries have started to outsource services to the private sector with the idea that then they can control costs and that it's becoming more efficient because it's business and that is cost averse. But it brings a whole new problem because a bureaucracy doesn't want to deal with loads of individuals who are all producing some kind of service. They, as a corporation, will go to another corporation who already provides those kinds of services in other places. And so basically it creates monopolies within the NGO sector, the non-government operations sector, non-profit operations sector. Sorry, no NGO, it's no non-government sector, where now you have not a market environment, but basically a monopoly where the public sector is dishing out contracts to corporates. And again, that's an entire business model that is built around that. And then that is just a absolutely fundamental point is that, and that is, when people's livelihood depends on a problem being there, the system can never provide a solution. So when you're looking at the NHS again, the National Health Service, as the biggest employer in the UK, if that actually got solved and either people get really healthy, which would be the ideal, or it gets really efficient, then you have all these unemployed NHS people there who basically don't have a job. Oops.
So if we could speak just briefly to that in Bellingham, that's exactly the pickle our community has found itself in when you're talking about wanting to build a jail or wanting to deal with mental health, because in Whatcom County, our mental health services is way off the chart. And part of that is because we were using our jail as the #1 mental health provider in the county for quite a few decades. I mean, Wendy Jones, the person who runs the jail, actually talked about it, the fact that the jail is the top mental health provider. Well, what that did is that created a bloated situation, which then required more mental health people, which then caused this growth. So we went from local to regional to statewide. And now in Skagit County, they've gone to hiring the top mental health provider in jail services in the past couple of years, because they grew a great big jail. They built a brand new jail in Skagit County. Then they didn't have enough local providers. So they hired out their mental health services to a national provider. And just in the last couple of years, we've discovered that national health provider is not providing proper services. And there's lawsuits across the nation from state after state after state. And yet the biggest provider was hired by Skagit County. And that's the problem that we deal with in Whatcom County as well. We end up going, our local people don't know how to do it. So they go bigger and bigger and bigger. Crisis services, our crisis facility ended up becoming a regional facility. And so we go from local to state to nationalized services. And it's a lose-lose imploding bloat cycle that you just described from the top down we're experiencing here right now.
Well,
so thank you, Ilona, again.
Yeah, and the key is that here you have Homo economicus in action. You know, because all the people within the system are acting rationally according to the rules of the system, and nobody is looking at the bigger picture.
We are.
And so, well, yeah, but you know,
we are starting to. That's the point.
We are starting to. Yes, we're bursting the bubble here today. But it's just more comfortable not to look at it because it's so overwhelming once you do. You know, and then what are you supposed to do if you're a little clerk somewhere in the police department? You know, so it's just easier to be the cog in the big machine.
Yep.
So yeah, so let's see. So this is now the US economy of 2020. This is the gross domestic product. I know it's very difficult to read, so don't worry too much. I just want you to get a sense of the size of things. And I'm sorry, I actually can't read because I've got all the pictures. Let me just move this across. So when you're looking at the biggest, so the biggest sector up here is the financial services sector. So that's banking, that's insurance, that's real estate, and everything connected to leasing and renting and all these kinds of things. They make up 22.3% of the global domestic, the gross domestic product of the US. So that's 1/5. Now, in terms of what we just talked about, in terms of the financial sector, the money and so on, that is not really great, because is that really added value, or is that just profiteering of a system that we see here? And so the gross domestic product in economics is supposed to represent the added value within an economy or within a country over 1 year. And what is so problematic on this is that, excuse me.
Excuse me, can somebody let a person from the waiting room?
You.
Sorry. Where was I? Yeah, is that the gross domestic product is used as the one and only measure of determining how well our economy is doing. And it's, I mean, it's been recognized by economists for a long time that this is not representing any reality. It's excluding all kinds of effects on environment, on health, and so on and so on. I'm sorry, I'm really.
I want to say that this chart, it took me a while to understand the significance of this chart. And it took me a while to understand that this whole chart, like there's a whole pile of those top segments that are just churning money. They're churning the system. They're making up churns in a churn system. And, you know, I mean, I used to churn butter and churn butter. I took milk and I churned the butter and I produced butter. And then I had whey and I could feed the whey and then whatever to the pigs, to myself. That's real domestic product. When they created the economic system, they created this gross domestic product. I never saw it as gross before, but that's sort of like a joke that I can see here now when I look at when Ilona actually went down all the way through here. And I went, most of the gross domestic product is gross. It's not real product. And that's what she talks about when she's talking about real value. That's what we need to bring this down home to real value. Who is producing actual product that is, I call it first value, like the first money, the original money upon which life has to move when we're producing product and providing goods and services. Who's doing that? It's the people at the bottom of this heap, not up there at the top.
Yeah. So we've got the financial sector, 22%. Then the second one is professional and business services. That's almost 13%. Now that's accountants, lawyers, consultants, all these kinds of things. These are all people who work for businesses in order to help them through the regulation, essentially. So again, this is not adding value to any normal human being. That is basically just administering the system and working with the system, outsmarting the system. That's what that is about. And then the third one is government. So that's 10.8%. And I've actually put the definition of government on here. So that is government consumption, expenditures, and investment. So that includes new roads, new bridges, infrastructure, stuff like that. And it basically includes what the government is using up in its own administration. And then the next one then is manufacturing at 10.8. That is the first one that is actually creating something that flows back to people. And then you've got, I mean, everything else, you know, that's in there. That is basically where normal people actually start getting involved in the whole thing. So yeah, so that's what, and I actually looked, I thought I had found something really exciting, and I I checked what the split was in 2000 and in 1995, I think. And this is not new. The US economy had basically the same split in 2000 already. So, but you can see when you look at the way the system is set up and the original economics, they were just talking about these kinds of sectors. You didn't have a financial sector and a business services sector back in 1865. You know, this is only stuff that has come in over the last, yeah, I would say maybe since the 1950s. So it's not even 100 years, and it has taken over the economy. This is something new. This is not so this is not representing the world of Adam Smith in any shape or form. But we're still looking at the same theory and the same system, even though we now have a completely different reality. Oops.
That's really quite an astute observation, because if you look at the 50 to 70 years, we're talking about a psychological, a physical, a business. It's basically we've changed the operating system of the way humans work in real time by relying on stick figures, if you will. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And it's exciting because once you see it, the choice is back with us. You know, once this veil is pulled, everyone is powerful again, because we don't have to go along with this.
A long time ago, they used to, The Greatest Salesman in the World was one of the books that was written, and it really came along with all this financial stuff, and everybody started talking about you can just, you know, get rich quick. And, you know, that whole movement came in to existence. And in a way, it is the greatest opportunity in the history of the world right now to turn around war. I just looked at all the number of wars that are going on. And that is that's like we're creating this false economy that's based upon these false stick figures, which is based upon dehumanizing. I mean, the whole thing has created this mass bubble. It's like, you know, when you take a sledgehammer out and you're banging on things, you happen to miss it, you hit your toe becomes this inflamed system. Well, that's what we've done, is we've inflamed the world with mass pain And think about the opposite of that. We have the greatest opportunity in the history of humanity and of the world to build a whole different economy, healing people.
Yep.
And healing our world and bringing humanity back into our bodies, into our soul, into our body, mind, spirit, so we can make a difference and heal all this stuff that we've created, not because we're doing it on money making, we're doing it on human decency and human dignity. And then you don't have to have all these predictive systems to be able to call it, because you know what? We can feel this stuff. That's the power. So
Yep.
I just wanted to insert that, Ilona, because
Absolutely.
we have functionality that we can bring back instead of living in constant dysfunctionality.
Yeah,
So thank
absolutely.
you.
Okay, so this is now looking at one of the key myths, I think, especially of the American system, is always the argument in the US is always that if you support rich people, the wealth will trickle down to the poor. You know, that is the story that is being, and it has been sold for decades and decades and decades. Now, when we're looking, and I have a few slides on this, so this is just to, again, throw a few numbers in there. So in the 10 years after the financial crisis, the first 10 years, the number of billionaires worldwide nearly doubled. So, so there's a few people who get insanely rich out of the crisis. In 2018, the 26 richest people in the world held as much wealth as half of the global population together. So 26 people have as much wealth as the 3.8 billion poorest people on this planet. That just can't be right or real or reflect any reality of value added or whatever. So to bring this into the US, the 6 heirs of the Walmart empire hold a wealth of $145 billion, and that is the equivalent of 1,782,020 average American families. So you have 6 individuals with the equivalent of 1.782 family incomes. So that's not even individuals. And then this is, and I'm going to show you some charts about on this in a minute. So between 1980 and 2013, the richest 1% of Americans have seen their income rise by 142%. During the same period, the median, that's the average household income, increased only by 9. And the important thing is that it actually only increased from 1980 to 1989. Since then, it's been stagnant. It hasn't increased at all. So that is the top 1% versus the average. And for the bottom fifth, so that's the poorest people with a stagnating income, they have been working 20% more working hours since 1990, 22% more. So essentially their income has come down. They have to work more hours just to stay level. And then in Whatcom County in 2019, the top 5.1% of taxpayers earned 8.2 times more than the 94.9% at the bottom. And that is not an extreme number. There are other counties that have much higher discrepancies.
But so this blows holes in the myth also, that in order to get out of poverty, all you got to do is work harder, get to work, go do your thing.
Yeah.
This whole slide blows holes in the entire story of how if you're in poverty, it's because you don't work hard enough. It's just not true. The people who are making the money are not working harder, believe me. They're simply churning that wheel faster in the fake economy system that allows them to add more zeros and zeros and zeros.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That statistic right there, because we have all kinds of conversations that happen in our political system and our structures. And we talk about, you know, the poor and the mentally ill and the this and the this and the this. And the default is, well, these people should just pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Well, if they don't have bootstraps in the first place, you can't pull yourself up. And even if you pull yourself up, if there's not a rung or a ladder to get onto to get yourself out, you sink again. So thank you, Ilona. Again, this is very, very eye-opening to people locally. Thank you.
So again, this is the graphs to this now. When you look at the left one, so this is the top line is productivity. And I've got one that goes further back into the 1950s, basically up to 1980. Productivity and the hourly wage was working in tandem. It was pretty much looking like this. So as productivity went up, the wage would go up. But since 1980, and that is really since all these technology bubbles and all this other stuff, this has been moving really drastically in different directions. So the median, the wage, hourly wage has kind of moved like this, and productivity has gone up. And the workers, the people actually generating the productivity are not sharing in the increase. So that is one side. And then again, this is kind of what I already said. This is the top 1% average income. That is how it's gone up and down since 1975. And this is the 99% average income, which, as I said, it's pretty much stable since then. And it's actually, if we had, this is ending in 2010, this is the financial bubble, the crisis. So the top 1% went down dramatically, but it's kind of gone up to here now, you know, so they recovered very, very quickly, whereas the rest kind of never caught up. So this is just a comparison between the US and Europe. And for me, this is debunking this myth of the American dream. I mean, Joy was already talking about it. This idea everyone can live their potential and everyone can get rich and everyone can have a brilliant life in the US. It's just not true. If it ever was, it's no longer true. So the inequality has risen much more rapidly in the US than in Europe. So the red line is the US. So that's the share of national income shared by the top 10%. So they had about, I don't know, 33 or something back in 1980. And now they have, I would say, 47. And that Western Europe is the purple line down here. And Europe as a whole is the blue one. So the trend is similar. In Germany, you can see the difference, especially, I mean, I was out of Germany for almost 25 years. I can see how the inequalities have come in, but it's nowhere as stark and extreme as it is in the US. Okay. So this is now the effect of what the systems do to human beings. And I think this is a really heartbreaking slide, actually. I pulled this out of a bipartisan paper that was, I think it was created in the Senate about the topic of mental health in the US. And they call this, this chart the death of despair. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional here. So the blue line is suicides. the black line is alcohol and the green line is drugs. And that is, so when you're looking at the gray one is basically adding them all up. I mean, I don't want to go too far into the past. You can kind of see at the end of the First World War around here, the number of deaths really came down because it was the end of war and the economy was booming and so on and so on. So everyone was doing quite well. Then you have this this peak again, that is the Great Depression. And then you have the end of World War II. So again, it's, you know, things are going well. And then you have kind of these golden years in the 1950s up to the 1980, where everything actually looked, at least on the surface, looked pretty good. But what I really wanted to show is really since 2000, it's just become off the scale. You know, I mean, this is just, and this is higher than it's ever been, ever in American history.
So a really good place to go listen to this, just to give people a breath here. There are so many suicides happening right now in our own circles of influence. And part of this has been exacerbated now in the last 2 years with COVID. Just in Whatcom County, I know at least 3 different people who have experienced somebody in their close, like in their first or second layer of contact, that have experienced suicide showing up in our families, just in Whatcom County in the last few weeks. Now, one of the things I want to point to is there's a series, you can look it up on YouTube. It's called The Hard Luck Generation or The Hard Times Generation. And it's done by 60 Minutes. And they started airing it back around 2001, I think. It might have been 2020 was their first. And they started doing a report on what was happening in Florida to the people in poverty and the homeless. And it's a really, if you want to understand the impact on our youngest generations and on the families of the youngest generations, that's up close and personal, and it's telling real stuff. And it was quite remarkable to watch it. And they have 2 or 3 different versions of that. Yeah, James, do you want to speak to that? You need to take yourself off mic.
One of the things that I was quite startled with is that Canada has now legalized assisted suicide. We can't run our passport offices. They're lined up. We can't run a whole bunch of government things. The one successful thing that they're doing is they're helping people do assisted suicide, because to me, that means they don't have to deal with the issues. I watched some people very young be allowed to do it, which I think was a cop-out on the government's end. So I'm just, it's to a point where that's even happening, not just drugs, alcohol. The government's allowing assisted suicide.
Wow, that's another twist. Thank you, James. Let's go back to Ilona.
Yeah, I mean, this is for me, this is the fallout of people being forced to be homo economicus or act as homo economicus within the system. And the discrepancy of who they truly are and their human side. I mean, I wouldn't be here anymore if I hadn't gotten out of the corporate system. I tried for almost 20 years to fit into it, and I realized in my mid-30s that I just couldn't. I just couldn't. And I wouldn't have been on this statistic. I would have developed health issues and probably have died of a heart attack or something. I was developing so many allergies and high blood pressure and all kinds of things because I just couldn't do this anymore. So this system is really at the root of so many other issues that society is grappling with, because we're denied our humanity. So this is looking at the cost of mental illness. And again, it's just numbers, but they're big ones. So nearly 1 in 5 Americans has some kind of mental health condition. So that's 20%. The spending on mental health treatment and services reached $225 billion in 2019. So again, there's businesses out there who make enormous amounts of money on the fact that Americans are mentally ill. That number actually increased by 52% since 2009. And it includes like things like therapy, prescription medications, psychiatric wards, rehabilitation. So it's quite an all-encompassing figure. In addition to that, there's the loss of productivity in the workplace. So just when you're looking at depression, it's estimated that that costs the economy about 44 billion in losses every year, because people can't actually be productive at work. And then you've got the like major depression. The average costs per year are about $11,000, whereas a person with diabetes is half that amount. So that will be really key to when we are now looking at mental health and incarceration and homelessness, because that feeds so much of what's happening on the street. I just wanted to mention one thing here, and that is the big pharma, to go back into the corporate patterns. It's just one that is so obvious. And as I said, I'm not pointing fingers at individuals, I'm just looking at patterns. But if you're a pharmaceutical corporation, how do you make your money? If you want to maximize profits, you need people to be sick but alive. So once people die, you can't get any money out of them anymore. Once they're healthy, you go out of business. So essentially, the entire pharmaceutical industry, if it wants to play by the rules of the economy, needs to keep us on medication, but make sure that we're not actually getting well in the process. And so that is the picture behind these statistics, especially when you're looking at mental health. So this is now looking at the connection between mental illness and incarceration. And Joy is going to talk much more about this later on. But the pattern is essentially, there's childhood adversities, there's, I don't know, one-parent families, poverty, crime, whatever, in the childhood, which leads to early onset psychiatric disorders and substance abuse. So when you go back to that death of despair chart, suicide is the last step. Before you commit suicide, you try to numb your pain. And then you have drugs and alcohol. If they get picked up at this point and are incarcerated, then that incarceration leads to the full-blown psychiatric disorder. And that leads to a disability to really fill any social or economic roles for the rest of people's lives. So, so this is kind of how it all hangs together.
So one thing, because I want to inject some hope in here.
Oops, sorry.
One of the people who is our real resident expert, in my opinion, is Debbie David, and she will be speaking about this later on this week when we get into solutions. Debbie has been studying on it, reading on it, connected to it. She's been living with it in different forms in her family, and she has been pulling together data. And if you go to our Facebook page, the Restorative Community Coalition, our Facebook page, she has been posting solutions in that Facebook page for a decade now, or as far back as we go, because she's been studying neurology and how the neural networks, and there's actually a lot of information in the market that talks about how you can re-heal. She studied about adverse childhood experiences. She studied about, generational patterns. There's a lot of powerful work coming out that we can use to make a difference. But if it's not talked about in the marketplace, because the advertising, I mean, when they started to legally be able to sell drugs, prescription drugs in advertising on television, it changed the entire game. And the promotion of Ritalin and the promotion of all these different drugs and the promotion of chemicalized food that's made by oil industries, all that is part of that whole conversation. And we're not here to talk about it, but I want to give you hope. There is an enormous amount of solutions out there. Bodies are resilient, emotions are resilient, humans are resilient. We can turn this thing around, but you got to recognize it's a sandpit. I mean, you got to recognize what's dragging you down. And once you see it, we can pivot. That's the cool thing. People can pivot. And so, Ilona, thank you for being willing to talk about this as part of the economic boondoggle that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I think it's important to see that this is directly connected to the dehumanizing effect of the systems. So Akasha, do you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, because we got a few people that they weren't here at the beginning. Could you just shortly tell us who you are and why you are presenting this?
Oh goodness. Okay. Sorry, I need to rewind.
Actually, let's not go there, because we need to continue on the path. This is being recorded. We will be able to go back and talk about this whole thing. We need to maintain what we're doing. We're already in time here. So
yeah. Okay, so sorry. I'm sorry, but I think we're losing the thread if I go into a completely different topic now. But thank you, Kasha. So this is a bit of an experiment now, and I hope it'll work. It's a chart I found online, which absolutely blew my mind, and I want to at least try and share it for you to have the same experience, maybe. It's actually taped up behind me, this line there, and I'm going to move the computer closer to it, and I hope you can actually see it. I'm going to move along it. What it is a chart that is looking at the incarceration rates globally, worldwide. The twist is that every single US state is counted as a country in this chart. So all the gray areas are US states and the orange areas are countries. And the incarceration rate is the number of people incarcerated in jails or prisons per 100,000 people in population. So this is not looking at big, big populations or small populations. It's basically, you can compare every country worldwide if you are looking at that ratio. How many people are incarcerated for every 100,000 people in your population? And so let me just see. Thank you. Oops. So unfortunately, I can't. I'm not sure. So, oh, no, actually there. So this is the start of it. As you can see, this is all gray, so the first country that actually pops up here in orange, oops, is here. And that is the United States average. Okay, so there are some states that have higher incarceration rates, some states that have lower incarceration rates. And then the next country on here is El Salvador, which is not really the ideal democracy that that you could think of. The next one is Turkmenistan, which is like it's almost a country in a war zone. That's one of the ex-Soviet Union countries. And then you've got countries like Rwanda, Cuba, Thailand, and so on. So the highest on this graph is Louisiana with 1,094 people incarcerated per every 100,000. The US average is 664. So, oops. So the key is now, I'm going to move along this chart, okay? This is seven pages of printouts that we put next to each other. This is New Zealand.
So hold on one second. Are we recording? Are you able to see? Can you stop the PowerPoint? Is that necessary, Kasia? Are you guys seeing?
Oh,
the
sorry,
full-
are you not seeing this? Sorry.
Are you seeing the full of this, Kasia? I'm not
Okay,
seeing
let
it
me
on my
just,
screen.
sorry.
If you go to speaker view and shrink the PowerPoint, it helps.
Okay, but you do see my screen, don't you?
I do,
Yes.
but I have two monitors and I stopped sharing for a moment, so the rest of the people can see yours.
I'm sorry, I'm going to give you the website where you can check this out for yourself.
This
but
is working now, though.
I just wanted for you to see it, because it's really, I mean, once you see it, you realize something is going on in the US that can't be quite right. So as I said, you've got it here. That's Louisiana at 1,094. This is New Zealand. This is Australia. This is the UK, that's Scotland, England. This is the Iraq, which is one of the evil states, as you know, but you know, they only incarcerate 126 people per 100,000. And then we're coming down to France. This is Afghanistan. This is Northern Ireland. This is Germany. Sweden.
You're too off the chart. You're off the focus.
I can't really see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Sweden, we're going all the way down. This is the end of it.
Where's Canada?
Canada is
103.
yeah, somewhere halfway down. It's a lot lower than the US anyway.
So just to be clear, the gray lines, they were United States
It
states.
was states, so states within the United States.
So when you look at that chart, when I printed it out for her this morning, I got to look at that thing and I realized that the United States, every single one of our 50 states is so far off the charts
Mhm.
that it's absurd. I mean, it is preposterous. It's so far off the charts. I asked her instead of putting it left to right on the chart up there, and she says, you can't fit it left. You can't go vertical because it's off the charts. Just the chart is off the charts.
It's almost 5 feet. That's what I am.
Yeah.
It's
what
yeah,
happens
as I
when
said,
you-
it's 7 pages.
That's privatizing your jail system.
And your mental health system and your big pharma and your oil, because when you wrap all those things together, it's all one huge nightmare bubble. Can you go back to sharing your PowerPoint as speaker view so that we get to see it?
Yeah, I'm back on the PowerPoint, so I don't
Okay, good.
know. Can you see it?
I can.
Yes,
thank
it's
you.
all good. It's all good.
Okay,
You
so
have
this
to bring from the bottom of your screen, you have to bring another window for Zoom.
so this is the same chart, but it's the shortened version. I just wanted to show you the full one. So this is looking at the United States as one country, so it's not breaking it down into the states. And so that's 655. And then you have Canada down here, James, at 114. It's kind of interesting that the British influenced countries all tend to be higher than the Western European ones, for
Well,
example.
it has a lot to do with our indigenous people, which is about, I don't know, 20% of our country, and they have about a 50% rate in incarceration. It's outrageous.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's similar in Australia as well.
So we will go into a lot more of this over the next few days, because that's the point. But I just, Ilona, this is so awesome to be able to bring this huge view down and down and down and down and keep on going.
That speaks to colonialism.
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah.
Well, and I mean,
The doctrine of discovery at its finest.
We're gonna talk about that tomorrow and the next day. So keep going.
What it speaks of also is a certain view of human beings.
Yeah.
You know, it's this can only be true if you have a really martial idea of reward and punishment, that you basically say human beings are always potentially criminal and they are going to do all kinds of things if you don't lock them up and get them out of the way. And this idea that basically a prevention, or that people, the majority of people are actually really good people who do as best as they can if they're helped properly, is not something that seems to be reflected in this at all.
Yeah, so it's a made up story, a made up myth, then made up behaviors, and then made up justification of behavior. The whole thing is fabricated on false premises. To start with, humans are living, human, breathing, loving, creative people. But when you're taken out of the entire story, we have story traps. And that's part of what we're going to talk about in the coming episodes. So,
I mean, the key for me is that when you see this, nobody can tell me that Americans are so much more criminal than anyone else. So there must be something else going on. That is really the main reason why I included this chart.
yes,
It's again to start asking questions, because the story that is being told can't be the whole story. This doesn't make sense. Yeah, so from there, let's go into the cost of locking so many people up. So this is the total government spending or government costs in 2016 was $295.6 billion. Yeah, you could do a lot of prevention with that, actually. More than 50% was paid by local governments, which I think is important, especially in the context of what we're talking about in Whatcom County. The total number of people incarcerated is 2.2 million people. So that means per prisoner, that costs $134,400 US.
And I want to be very clear, this statistical chart looks bad because 2.2 million people are incarcerated. Those are the ones in prison. That's not counting the other 10 million that are cycling through the system in jails and are not yet technically, they're not convicted or they haven't pled guilty.
I'm coming to that. So this is
Okay.
basically at any point in time, there's 2.2 million people in jail, but this is a point rather than a time frame. So this is the same, this is the same numbers, but looked at it in a slightly different way. Or actually, let's go back just to see. So the police is making up, out of this 296 billion, the police is making up the bulk of it with 140 million. And then you've got the jails with about 90 million, and then the legal system with 60 billion, sorry, billion, not million, in costs. This is looking at the same numbers, but in a slightly different way. This is looking at who's actually paying for it. And you can see here 147.3 or 0.4 billion are paid by local governments. This would be the police part of it. This is the justice system, and this is the corrections cost. And then state governments and federal government are these two charts. So this is kind of coming where, yeah, where over 80% of people in jail are under local authority and they have not been convicted of crimes. So that means there's about 10 million people going through the system every year. So you've got the 2.2 at any point, and then 10 million basically going through the system, some of them repeatedly. And they have not been convicted and should be presumed innocent, because that's how the system is supposed to work. So how can you lock them up when they're not convicted of any crime? When you look at the patterns behind it, the majority of them are too poor to make bail. And so they stay locked up until trial. And 1 in 4 people, yeah, 1 in 4 people who go to jail will be arrested again within the same year, often because of mental illness, substance abuse, and so on. So now this is looking at additional costs. This is the estimated costs of incarceration to families. Actually, in addition to that, it's estimated that every incarcerated person loses about $500,000 US in lifetime earnings when they're going to jail. So that's the personal loss that they have by having a record, a criminal record. And then there's another 531 billion that is carried by the family. And that includes things of basically the repetition of crimes, like a career crime kind of thing, the increased criminality of children, health effects, child welfare, and so on and so on.
Ilona, is this global or in United?
No, this is only US. All of this is just the US. So this is some patterns within the incarceration business. What is the business model? And I'm not now looking at whether it's private or public prisons, because as I said earlier, within the bureaucracy, there are similar patterns if you want to be successful and have a career. So if you're looking at the incarceration business, individual power increases with bigger jails and higher crime rates. So the more crime you have, the more important you are if you are fighting crime, and the more important you are if you are anywhere within that system, whether it's the incarceration system, the police, or the legal system. And because of that, whenever there are plans about, how does this develop going forward, the law enforcement or the incarceration, I don't want to call it incarceration business, but basically the people who decide whether jails are necessary or not, they always have a tendency to assume that crime will just get worse. And again, you're creating a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there. So of course, again, when you look at this pattern we talked about earlier in the NHS, if crime were to go down, you have unemployed incarceration officers. You've got unemployed police officers. You might even have unemployed criminal lawyers and judges. And, what do they do with their life then, if you're not a criminal prosecutor? So again, if you're just looking at your part of the picture, it's a rational way to just kind of see the world in ever increasing crime rates.
I want to call it the jail industry business is, in fact, we have a Washington State jail industries group that was legalized and created in Washington State in the late 90s. And that jail industry business model, they call it that themselves. It's the jail industry. And that jail industry, the people who are the independent contractors within that jail industry do business with other government organizations. So institutions have to buy from these institutions, and it's become another hierarchy of an industry, much like you have bloated other corporations that do business within it. And the churn,
Yep.
that churn is happening in Washington state. And I was stunned to find that out as a businesswoman. That's what really got my attention once Irene got my attention at the bottom end of this thing. And then as I studied, there's a report in the Restorative Community Coalition's website at therestorativecommunity.org, and you can search for it. It's Noble Cause Corruption. And in that report, we diagram what's happened in Whatcom County in the context of Washington State, in the context of the Washington State Jail Industries Association, and how that fed into the the promoting of that huge jail that we're talking about in Whatcom County. So I just want to underscore that it is called an industry. It is based on a business model, and that's real. And it's the jail industry is different than the prison industrial complex. The jail industry is the feeder system that feeds into the prison industrial complex, and then ultimately into the war and oil industry. So thank you, Ilona.
Yeah, so once the decision has been made and jails are built, actually there's just this one thing. So I think the cost of jails, if you looked at it as a normal business, you would say, well, jails are expensive and that's not a good thing. Shouldn't we have other ways to deal with this? But if you're looking at it from the law and justice perspective, the jail is actually the one that makes you more powerful, that makes you increases your budgets and increases your influence within the public sector. And so the costs are actually by the bureaucracy behind it are not necessarily regarded as negative, especially when you come from the view that you say, well, it's taxpayers who pay for this. And in theory, at least, there's unlimited supply of money, and taxpayers will just going to cough it up. So then once you've got the jail built, you need to keep the beds occupied. So when Joy talked about it yesterday, I know it's 2,450 or something beds in the planned jail in Whatcom County. Obviously, Whatcom County doesn't have that many criminals to put in there. So so what is happening is that the corporations are actually, the public corporations are actually developing a business model that now generates income by renting out beds outside the county. So that could be either to neighboring counties or even statewide. And that has become nationwide a big business, because that generates an income per bed per day. So that is the one side. And the other side is that in order to use up capacities, you have to make sure that people are staying in jail longer. So one of the ways to do that is, and as far as I know, I said, this is not my expert area, so please interrupt me if I'm talking rubbish, but the bail policy is set by the counties and by the prosecutors or the judges within the counties. So there are counties that set up quite high bail amounts and others who don't. Sorry?
Yeah, so that is, all three of these things are things that our coalition has had to diagram out to actually understand how to take apart the different parts of it. And there's a movie in the restorativecommunitycoalition.org website and on our YouTube channel also, and on my Joy Gilfillan YouTube channel, that's called No Bigger Jail. And it's about investing in humans instead of the business, because the business of incarceration, the business of the jail, is in fact a profit center for the county. It's called a business center, And as a business center, our county, for example, our sheriff was charging $147 a day to other municipalities and the tribes, and they were profiteering, in fact, off of that bed rate. When we stopped the jail tax at one point, and the county had to renegotiate, the county sheriff had to renegotiate bed rates, we found in the city of Bellingham that they could go to Yakima, that Yakima would make them a better deal on buying beds, and they were paying $75 a day for the bed rate. Now we're renegotiating. So there's a whole different economy that's running from county to city about who's charging what for the bed space. So that's a whole other conversation that we will have. It requires unpacking it, but what you're doing is you're really pointing out that there's also a business economy in bail.
Yeah.
Right now in Whatcom County, there are people being arrested and put in the jail, and they're only charging $5,000 or $10,000, $50,000 in bail. And some people are being held in there for far less violent crime at $150,000 a bail. So because the broker dealing of who gets to go into the jail is a better deal for the county if they keep certain people in for longer periods and put up higher bail. So it's really fishy, and it's really twitchy when you get inside the understanding the details of how this industry works. So this is going to be more, that's why we're doing this conversations as opposed to making this a symposium. This is community regenerative conversations. People locally need to learn these distinctions in order to have rational conversations about how to change the system. And we need to do this in every county, everywhere, because within the states, there's different language and there's different bail accounts. And in every municipality, there's different judges, and there's no regulation over any of this. So it becomes this huge cesspool of chaos in definition. So that's one of the reasons, Ilona, I'm so grateful you're here, because we are going to write up reports in the next few weeks that we will be able to put, and in the back of that report, we will have a glossary of terms, because you need to be able to translate between what you're talking about. So thank you, Ilona. You're doing an amazing job right here.
So yeah, so in addition to that industry or business model within the public or private sector, as I said, this doesn't really matter whether you're looking at public or private sector, because the patterns are the same.
Yep.
There's over 4,000 businesses are estimated to profit from mass incarceration from healthcare providers, food suppliers, commissary merchants, and so on, nationwide. So this is a massive industry beyond just locking people up. So that we're not looking at a complete ending on a really depressing note, I just want to share a case study from Florida, which is kind of, you know, I said there's going to be more conversations about all of this. And Florida is a state that has a lot of issues around mental health. So this is basically the way it was before one judge in Miami-Dade County decided to do something about it. So Florida had a mental health budget of $144 million. 25% of that was spent on just 2,500 people, while at the same time, between 130 and 140,000 people needed immediate treatment at the time of their arrest. So basically, there were people who were being arrested, 140,000, who actually really needed emergency treatment. So the budget is just, the money is not spent where it's needed. That's really the key point here. And then over 12 years, there had been a 50% increase in the number of people sent to prison. But the percentage of people with mental health issues going to prison during the same period had grown by 178%. So basically, there were a lot more people locked up with mental health issues than the average arrested people. So if that had gone on without any intervention, that would have meant that Florida needed to actually, no, this is actually already Dade County. So Dade County, no, maybe it's Florida, whatever, doesn't matter. But they would have needed 10 new prisons over 10 years with a cost of $2.5 billion in order to lock all these people up. Miami-Dade County apparently has, there's a lot of people suffering from serious mental illness, almost 3 times the national average. So it's 197,000 adults and 55,000 children. And 35% of county inmates used to be on medication for mental illness. And that costs about $500,000 a day, and it was 180 million a year. So again, we're talking, and this is just Dade County. So we're talking about really huge numbers. So what they decided to do was to bring in a community-based treatment and support system in 3 steps. There was a pre-arrest program, a post-arrest diversion program, and then a competency restoration program with a focus of integrating people back into the community. So in the pre-arrest, basically what they did is they trained police for crisis intervention. So when they were called in and there was a mental health case there, they could identify it. And it led to, and they could basically, rather than sending them into jail, they were funneled into that new system. So out of 83,427 mental health calls between 2010 and 2017, only 139 arrests happened. So people were not arrested, they were already sent to intervention centers outside of the jail and the incarceration system. And the number of arrests per year went down from 118,000 when the project started to 56,000. So that's about half. Today, that was in 2020. At the same time, the jail occupancy rate was cut into half from 7,200 to 4,000. And one of the county's 3 main jails was closed. The savings to the county were 12 million per year over the last 6 years. So that is the pre-arrest intervention. Once they were arrested, everyone who met the criteria with serious mental illness is not put into a normal jail, but is basically putting into a stabilization, a special unit within 3 days, and they are kept there for up to 2 weeks. Just in order to really treat them for that's basically the detox, I would say. And so within 2 years of the launch, the recidivism rate for misdemeanors dropped from 72% to 20%. And then the third part is the competency restoration program. They actually expanded it into non-violent crimes from misdemeanors, and defendants who are basically undergoing treatment until their court date. And at the same time, there's a system to help them reintegrate back into the community. And participants achieved a mental competency rate on average 52%, 2 days sooner than people who had been run through the incarceration system, and at 32% cost savings than those who are admitted to a state hospital. Again, the recidivism was reduced by 25%, and the savings to the county were about 68 years of jail bed days. 68 years. So this is what happens when you start looking at it in a different way.
What's the judge's name?
I tell you.
Okay.
It is incredible what you realize when you have people with different eyeballs start looking at these things, because we all have blind spots. Every one of us has a blind spot, and we don't know what they are because you don't know what you don't know until you know you don't know it. Right? And so one of the most valuable things we can do in Whatcom County, and I am so grateful to the people who are on this call, because you're from all over the nation and you have different percentages of influence that you have in your own community. And each one of you has a different part you can play. And the good thing about viruses, whether they're fake viruses or real ones, is that they can pass through the ethers to other people, and we can infect other people with new ideas, and we can infect them with new solutions. And when we started fighting with this, if you'll notice the time, Irene didn't have this information. This information has been coming out over the past 5 and 10 years because people didn't know to look at jail industries as a business model. But today, what you just found here, I didn't find this when I was looking just a few years ago to make arguments for the Restore Life Center, which we'll be talking about later on this week. One of the visions that Irene has had for a very long time is to do what these guys are doing. And we proposed it, and it's been proposed. It's been happening in other parts of the nation, but because we don't talk about it, it hasn't become the new virus or the new infection in the business community that actually puts people back to work, saves lives, makes us happy, does all the things that we want to do. The models are here. And I thank you so much, Ilona, for bringing one forward. Irene, you're trying to say something.
I am, and I'm going to go over there because if I do anything, I'm going to lose you.
Okay.
So she's coming over here.
I am here. Thank you. My gosh, this is so awesome. And most of what you already reported in Florida, we will do and have been doing without the Restore Life Center. But I know that our numbers would drop in the same manner, if not more, because there's so many things that can be done and that are not being done. And it's like you can't unsee what you just saw. And with this graft, it's an absolute system that is set up for the system to survive, not those going through it. And when people get that, it's going to make all the difference. And I just want to say to everyone listening out there that might be going into fear or despair or having an oh my gosh feeling about what are we going to do, there's lots that we can do. We have so many solutions, and all of you that are on this call have the same goal, is to just be friends with one another, and let's quit making each other the bully man and get out of our fear, and let's just be kind and human to one another. I'm very excited for our future. I am so grateful to Joy for putting this together. And I'm grateful to all of you who understand what we're doing. Blessings.
This is amazing work. And I know, Ilona, that you have some closing comments. I want to notice that we will have another call coming on at 1 o'clock. We will be closing down this recording until we finish, so that we can close this one up before we open another one. But Ilona, please finish what your whole presentation is here, because we can get excited when we start talking about solutions. There are so many solutions. Once you open your eyes and the blinders come off, there are so many solutions. There are so many people we can put to work. There are so many things that can be done, and that's what the next few hours is going to be about. But Ilona, finish up what you wanted to talk about, because that was your, I know that was one of your closing case studies, but
This was, yeah, this is the last slide, but I want to say a few things to complete it. The whole point of the presentation is this is the way it is because humans are not allowed to be humans. We're not allowed to interact with each other as human beings. And it's breaking our hearts, it's making us sick, and it's making some people very, very, very rich. For me, I mean, as I said earlier, I've traveled around the world. I've been to very different countries with very different cultures. And I am always so in awe about the people I meet everywhere and the potential that is there in each and every one of us. And in the Western worlds, the system very often has disconnected us from our real self. I mean, I said at the beginning, you know, when I was 16 years old, the one vision I had for my life was to travel the world and visit friends. And that was my career plan. That's what I'm doing now. You know, I never, at 16, there was no way. I mean, that was 1983. There was no way this was ever going to be possible. And we are now moving faster through stuff than ever before. And everything I talked about is already in dissolution. The systems are crumbling. They can't hold it together. And the solution lies in individuals finding out who they are and coming together to find solutions. And there's so many different ways we can do it now, online, in person, and internationally. There's so much creativity and so much inspiration out there. You can see this as the ultimate nightmare, or you can see it as the gate into a completely new reality and a completely new world and a completely new planet. And that's how I see it. And I'm excited by what I just talked about, because it shows, you know, 30 years ago, it wouldn't have been as obvious that this doesn't work. Now it's becoming obvious for everyone, and you can't really deny it anymore. And so that means now we can start building a different world. So thank you so much for listening, for me going on for like 2.5 hours. It was really, really great to talk to you. Thank you.